Dziękujemy bardzo.
Thank you very much. And now we can begin the plenary lectures. Let's have our speakers. Our first presentation will be delivered by Mr. John Carr from the UK. John is a well-known internet consultant, and for many years he's been the secretary of a coalition of organizations working for protection of child welfare organizations. He is a member of many organizations dealing in this field. In his presentation, he will tell us about lobbying and what can be done to influence policy together with a number of organizations, and he can tell us about how effectively, what effects can be obtained drawing on his personal experience, Mr.
Dzień dobry. That's it, I'm afraid. Even though my father was Polish, that's all the Polish I know. So, good morning. It's very nice to be back here in Warsaw, back here in Poland, speaking to you. What a very impressive gathering. Very many congratulations to the organisers for putting together such an impressive number of people. I'm sure that's an indication of the level of interest there is in this subject within Poland. First, a little bit of information about me and the organisations that I work with, principally. I'm an executive board member of an organisation called the European NGO Alliance for Child Safety Online. And you can see here on the screen 15 different countries within the European Union are members of it. Of course, pride of place is given to Poland and Germany, the two organisers of today's conference. And the reason really that INAXO, that's what we call it, INAXO came together was because we understood as children's organisations that when speaking together with a single voice to industry and to governmental institutions, our power increased accordingly. When you deal with many multinational corporations, as you inevitably do when you're dealing with internet policy issues, one thing that they very often say, or certainly one thing they very often used to say, to us in the United Kingdom and in some of the other countries that we worked with very closely before INAXO was formed, they used to say to us, well, John, it's all very well you saying that, but the internet is a global medium. We operate across many, many countries simultaneously, and so we can't just respond to issues being put to us by one set of people in one country. We need to know that the views that you're articulating, the opinions that you're putting forward, also have some resonance with and are shared by people in many of the other markets, many of the other countries that these companies also work in. And that was very much the idea behind the formation of INAXO. So we have now children's organizations, as I say, all from 15 different countries in Europe, soon, in the European Union rather, soon it will go up to 20, and there will be scope for expanding further into other countries that are not at the moment within the European Union. And I think it's a fairly new organisation, but I think it's going to be one that's very important in the future, precisely because, as I've said, international companies respond far better when they're dealing with themselves with international institutions. And of course, we work very closely with the European Union, with the Commission, who fund and very much support the work of INAXO. Within the United Kingdom, I work with and for this alliance of children's organisations. You can see their logos up there. The one that I'm personally most closely associated with is Action for Children, which is the one there on the right-hand side, in red. like many of the other organisations there, Action for Children works across a very, very broad range of issues to do with children and young people's experience growing up, obviously in our case in Great Britain. We are, for example, the largest independent adoption agency within the United Kingdom. We run 50 different projects in different parts of Great Britain dealing with children who suffered from a variety of forms of abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. Some of the children that we deal with and we work with were abused by and through the internet. Some of them have had their photographs taken of them being sexually abused, posted on the internet. But really the key point I want to make is that these organisations work across a very broad spectrum of concerns for children. And so that knowledge of how children's lives are lived, how families work, very much informs the work that we do in the internet space. We are not narrow specialists focused solely on cyberspace, solely on high-tech issues. But we understand that in today's world, children's use of and involvement with the internet in particular and the new technologies in general is absolutely central to the way in which they live. It's no longer possible, as we used to try to do not that long ago, to divide issues into online issues and offline issues. Children don't live their lives like that anymore. For them, the internet is simply a part of the way they live their life. So when you're dealing with a question of bullying, for example, or something of that nature, it's very, very unlikely that the bullying that a child is experiencing is happening only at school or only in the street. It will also almost certainly be a feature of what's happening to them and through them in the internet space as well. And so really the point I wanted to make is about the breadth of interests that we work with, and we're by no means limited to or only concerned with real life issues. I might just say some of these organisations, the NSPCC in particular, are extremely well-known organisations within Britain. They employ over 6,000 people full-time, and some of them were founded in the mid-19th century and are very, very well-known organisations within the United Kingdom. So, turning to politics. Winston Churchill, you may have heard of him. This is his view of what democracy is. He said it's the worst possible form of government, except for all of the others. And those of us who live within democracies and those of us who have to shape and influence the way public policy operates will know that only too well. Democracies, countries in the end are made up of individuals with all of their imperfections, with all of their rivalries, with all of their personal positions and so on. And these are the tools with which we have to work. Now, I know that in any system of government, the perfect way for any government to behave, if ever a problem arose to do with children and the internet, would be simply to ring me up and ask me ask me to tell them what to do. Unfortunately, it doesn't work quite like that, and we have to find our own way of influencing policy. Now, in the internet space, in most of the West European countries, indeed most of the democracies around the world, the idea of self-regulation is the core idea, the core notion for formulating policy. I know that's how a lot of it works here in Poland. It's been central to the way in which internet policy has been formulated in the United Kingdom since about 1996. And it's been elevated by some people to, in my view wrongly, to being a permanent feature of political life, of public life. In other words, some people argue, some people believe that self-regulation is the only way in which policy can and should be made in relation to the internet. Now, my view is slightly different. If you look back at the beginnings of the way in which the internet burst onto the scene very, very suddenly, very, very rapidly in the mid-late 1990s, certainly it was the case in the United Kingdom that there were no more than a half a dozen politicians, maybe a half a dozen police officials in the entire country who had any idea at all about how the internet worked, how it worked at a technical level, and how it was being used up and down the country. So really, when the internet first burst onto the scene, self-regulation was the only way in which any public institutions, certainly in the democratic world, could respond to some of the challenges that were being posed by it. In the case of the United Kingdom, one of the first things that the public as a whole knew about the arrival of the internet was that suddenly a huge quantity of child pornography, a huge quantity of child abuse images suddenly started to be becoming available and being circulated. There was a great deal of public anxiety, a great deal of comment about this by politicians, by the newspapers and so on. And yet the institutions of government, the institutions within law enforcement, had very little actual knowledge of how to respond to that. They didn't, in those days, most police stations had no internet connections at all, and there were no police officers trained in their use. And that's not surprising because the internet was still very new. And so self-regulation, certainly within the United Kingdom, emerged as a very pragmatic and practical response to dealing with a situation that basically none of our public bodies were aware of. Now, I'm not suggesting that that means that therefore it was simply, it was of no other value. Of course, when you are dealing with complex technical issues, having good information being supplied to you, having the regular involvement of the industry themselves and their many technical and other experts can make a huge difference to the way in which you make policy. The crucial difference that it can make, of course, is the speed at which decisions can be taken. Again, in the United Kingdom, typically it takes 3 years for the government to recognise that the problem exists, consult about it, produce a bit of legislation or a new bit of law, and then get that law passed through. Now, 3 years is not bad by most standards, but 3 years in the internet space is 2 lifetimes. So if the only way that we have of responding to new technical challenges, new issues that arise within the internet is through the conventional or traditional methods of lawmaking and public policy making, then of course we're going to be in great trouble. And to that extent, having a self-regulatory framework where the different players within the industry voluntarily excuse me, where the different players in the industry voluntarily come together and try to work out solutions and implement them is, of course, of great potential value. But I just want to make the point that at the end of the day, in most of our countries, we have fought over many, many years to create the democratic institutions, the public policy-making institutions that we now have. And in the end, I think they're going to continue to be of great importance, and they will be of growing importance because now more and more politicians, more and more arms of government, more and more consumers, the voters, understand the issues to do with how the internet works, and so they're becoming more and more self-confident about dealing with them. And as that happens, what I'm sure will happen is that more and more of this will become part of the regular and established means of policy making within the public sector. What this does for us as NGOs, and I'm speaking very much as a person from the NGO community, is it places a great deal of importance on our ability and capacity to work both with industry and with the political processes. And that in turn puts a premium on two things. First of all, we have to have an ability to assemble and present reliable data. If you're going to get involved campaigning in a public arena, working with government, working with industry, then it is absolutely essential, in my view, that you rapidly gain a reputation for knowing what you're talking about. And that in turn means that you have to have excellent research data, excellent sources of information. Not always easy for often small and not very well funded NGOs. And of course, you also have to have, if you're dealing with any aspect of public policy, in my opinion, very good links with the media. I just want to dwell on that for a couple of seconds. In my opinion, there are essentially 2 types of internet company now working in this field, and there are two types of responses that you get from politicians. If we, as NGOs, didn't have the ability to get a story out into the media, to get our research and our opinions heard, I don't think some companies would pay any attention, or some politicians would pay any attention to us at all. And I say some because I think it's also true that there are parts of the internet industry who genuinely want to know what the NGOs have to say. They genuinely recognize that we have valuable insights into the way in which children and young people use the internet. They genuinely believe that we have valuable insights into the way in which the internet is impacting on children and young people's lives, and they genuinely want to hear from us. Apart from anything else, it saves them a great deal of money having to do the research themselves. But also, and we have to acknowledge this, there are some who only respond because they believe we're powerful, that they believe that we can mobilize public opinion through the media, or that we can mobilize political opinion. And in that connection, the media plays an absolutely central role as an ally of ours. But it does mean that you have to, in my opinion at any rate, invest a great deal of time in developing and establishing and maintaining good working links with the media. The media is one of the key pillars of modern democracy. They're not always perfect, God do we know that, certainly in Great Britain, but they are nonetheless a vital part of our armoury in campaigning for and trying to influence the political agenda. A number of NGOs, I'm aware, do focus on very narrow and very quite specific aspects of how children use the new technology, or how different sorts of problems manifest themselves in children's lives. And there is a great deal of advantage in doing that, because it means, of course, that you can develop great expertise in the field. But certainly when we've been dealing with the internet industry and government in the UK, and I know this is true in other countries as well, being able to take a comprehensive view is also invaluable. Many of the issues when you're dealing with internet policies, I'm sure you're aware, cannot be neatly separated or compartmentalized. And that argues for forming partnerships or coalitions with other groups, and that's exactly what the coalition that I work with in the United Kingdom is all about, bringing together different groups of experts from different parts of the child protection world to speak together with one voice, as I say, makes us all that much more powerful and influential. And it also means that, of course, it increases your political appeal and your political reach, because each of our different organisations has its own contacts with members of parliament, has its own contacts with government ministers, has its own contacts with the media and so on. So working together in the way that we do as an umbrella, as an umbrella body, means that we can bring all of those different elements together much more easily. And of course, we also have to recognise that whenever you're dealing with the internet, there is a layer of technical complexity that is going to be very important to understand in any of the arguments that we have to make with industry or with government. And so it's also vital, and I really do stress this, vital, that we have in our campaigning work access to reliable technical knowledge. I've seen a number of cases, certainly in Britain, where organisations have marched up and down the streets with placards and banners. I mean that sometimes literally, but certainly metaphorically. And they've been completely wrong about aspects of the technical issues that they're trying to address. And that completely cuts the ground from underneath your feet, because it means politicians or elements in the industry can marginalise or ignore you simply by saying you don't really understand the fundamental nature of the issue that you're talking about. It's very, very easy to say that we're against child pornography or we're against child abuse. Everybody is against those things. What people want to hear from us, however, are practical answers and practical solutions that have at least the potential of working within the real world. Now, one of the One of the things that we did within the United Kingdom was produce what we call our digital manifesto. Here is a copy. I have, and it was jointly written, by the way, by myself and Dr. Zoe Hilton, who's speaking to you later today on a different issue. But it was published in the name of all of the children's organisations. Now, this has become for us an extremely important document and an extremely important part of our campaigning armoury when we're dealing both with industry and with government. We produced one. I've got about 15 copies with me, by the way. They're up here. They're free. Actually, no, the price depends on the demand, okay? We have about 15 copies here. I couldn't bring any more because they're very heavy to carry, but there is a PDF of the whole thing available on our website, which is www.chiz.org.uk. But anyway, this has become for us an extremely important document. This is the third manifesto that we have produced. We produced one just before the election in 2001. We produced one just before the election in 2005. And we produced one, this came out 2 months ago because we're going to have an election sometime within the next 6 months. We don't know exactly, but it has to be before June of next year. And the document's very important for us in a number of different ways. First of all, simply by carrying out the exercise of writing the digital manifesto, what it forced us to do was to look back at the last 5 years and see how much we had achieved. What was it that we said 5 years ago that we thought government and industry needed to do, and how much of it have they done? How much of it do they still need to do? So from our point of view, this was a very important milestones document. It gave us a measure of how successful or unsuccessful we were being in the work that we did. And the second thing, of course, is it gives us a basis for approaching the political parties, asking them to commit themselves and make promises around the policy issues that we raised in here. Because, as you know, whenever elections are approaching, politicians suddenly become much more attentive. They're much more ready to listen to you as an election is approaching than they are perhaps at any other time. And you can extract promises from them and then hope that they win and then keep their promises. But having got the commitments on paper definitely has been very important for us. So we prepared this. It took, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 months maybe to write the whole thing, go through all of the consultations with all of the different member bodies and do various revisions and edits and so on and so forth. But the thing that I think is good about this document, going back to the point I made earlier, is that it is comprehensive. We do claim that this document sets out or covers all of the ground that we think is currently important in the field of child protection in the online space. And if you look at it, you will see that we made 42 separate recommendations across a number of different headings. And I'll just briefly indicate, very, very briefly, because do you want to, how are we doing for time? 10 minutes, okay. I'll very briefly indicate what the main headings at least were for the different policy issues that we raised. Obviously, there's a great deal in there. In fact, probably the largest group of recommendations that we've made in our document concern child abuse images. In the United Kingdom, as you will hear later, we have a voluntary system of blocking, and it's working quite well, but not well enough. And so we made various recommendations in there about how to improve it. And Zoe Hilton's going to speak about that later, so I won't go into that in any greater detail. But some of the things Zoe won't be mentioning, though, I know, are to do with the need for more research about the link between the images and abusive behaviour and that kind of thing. So when I say we made a large number of recommendations about child abuse images, when you actually look at them carefully, several of them tie in with other aspects of policy as well. And they're not simply about the images or the posting of the images. They're also, as I say, about research and information needs, not connected with the production and distribution of the images, but also we pointed to the need for a better understanding of the impact of child sex abuse on victims of child abuse images. There is an assumption in some quarters that a child who's been sexually abused where the images appeared on the internet has experienced more or less exactly the same sort of abuse as a child who was sexually abused where the image didn't appear on the internet. And we're not sure that's true. We think there are new and different aspects of it, and that there are implications for the therapeutic treatment or needs of a child who's been made the subject of those abusive images. And what we were pointing out to the government and to the industry was that we need to know a lot more about the dynamic of that sort of experience of abuse on the child and its implications for that child's therapeutic or support needs. We also made a number of comments about policing priorities. Again, partly this tied back to child abuse images and the way in which the trade in child abuse images is shifting more away from the web towards peer-to-peer. We also spoke a great deal about an issue that started to become important in the United Kingdom, and that's to do with access to age-restricted goods and services online. Now, I don't know what the law is in Poland, but in Great Britain, for example, a child under the age of 18 is not allowed to buy alcohol in a supermarket or in an off-license or in a bar. A child under the age of 18 is not allowed to buy a knife in a shop. They're not allowed to buy tobacco. There are various restrictions about glue and spray paints. There's a whole, in fact, there are 23 different products which are on sale in Great Britain where there is an age restriction of some kind which applies to them. By and large, it's not completely successful, but by and large, children, it's very difficult for a child to buy alcohol in a shop, because the shopkeeper knows that if they sell alcohol to somebody who turns out to be under 18 and they're caught, they could lose their business completely, and if they do it more than once or twice, they could end up going to jail. What's happening, however, is that the banks and the credit card companies have started issuing a new type of credit card which you can buy for cash. You can just walk into a shop, hand over 100 zloty or 150 zloty or £50 or whatever it might be, and get a card with MasterCard or Visa's name on it, and you can then go and register yourself for that card's use without any checks being made about who you are or what age you are or anything. I have bought one of these cards and registered myself as Donald Duck. I gave my address as Buckingham Palace, London SW1, and I gave my age as 8. And then I ordered a case of vodka, which was then very conveniently delivered to my house by Virgin Wines, not a small company, a big company. And sadly, a lot of kids who want to get alcohol. And by the way, you also get alcohol cheaper if you buy it over the internet. So if you want to get alcohol cheap, or tobacco's cheap, or knives cheap, you buy them over the internet, and you don't even have to carry them home. The company will deliver them to your door. And we've had a number of cases, a significant number of cases, where this has been happening, and so we've been campaigning for a change in the law, because basically what it means is that companies who couldn't sell things to children because they were under an obligation to check their age if they came into the shop are now selling them to children over the internet, and we think that's wrong and bad for public policy. We had a great deal of trouble in this space several years ago in relation to gambling. We discovered that many children were going on the internet and gambling away their pocket money or their hard-earned weekly cash over the internet. Again, absolutely illegal. You have to be 18 to be able to gamble in the United Kingdom, but children were nonetheless going onto the gambling websites and placing bets. And the reason we found out about this, by the way, is that parents started ringing us up or writing to us asking what to do because their child of 13 was a gambling addict. They developed a gambling addiction. So we campaigned for a change in the law, and which we won. It was very successful, and the gambling companies were all obliged to introduce a robust age verification system for all of their online gambling websites. That law finally came into effect on the 1st of September 2007, and since that law came into effect, we are not aware of a single instance of any child in Great Britain being able to beat the system and get on the internet to gamble. And that, by the way, that example of dealing with gambling, online gambling and children, is one of the great successes of this process, because it was one of the policies that we identified, it was one of the policies that we campaigned around, it was one of the policies that the government acted upon, changed the law, I have to say, in the face of opposition by the gambling industry at the time, but now it's been seen to work extremely successfully, and we're now trying to argue that we need to extend the same approach that we adopted for gambling to deal with all of these other things that are on, say, alcohol, tobacco, knives in particular. Those are the three main ones. Online data protection and consent issues, also an issue that's becoming increasingly important. In the United Kingdom, the law does not specify an age at which a child is deemed to be capable of giving consent on the internet or anywhere else for that matter. And so what's happening is some companies are saying that if a child tries to join their service, their social networking site or whatever, and they're below the age of 13, they have to get verifiable parental consent. But many other companies are not making any stipulations. But the key point is, either way, there is no clarity in the law about the age of consent for giving data, for giving consent to issues over the internet. In Spain, they passed a specific law to say that any child under the age of 14 may not give any personal information about themselves to any internet company unless that internet company has first obtained specific and verified consent from the parent that the child can give that information. In the United States, they have a law which says the age is 13. In the United Kingdom, we don't have a law, so it's very vague. The advice from the Data Protection Authority is that, generally speaking, a child of 12 is considered to be capable of understanding enough to be able to give consent and to be able to give their data to an online company. But it is in fact meant to be a subjective test. In other words, what the Data Protection Authority says in the United Kingdom is that Google or Microsoft or Yahoo or Bebo, whatever it might be, they are meant to individually assess each and every child's capability of understanding what it is they're getting into as they sign up for their social networking service or whatever, before they allow them to sign up. Well, of course, absolutely nobody is doing it. And it's very hard to understand how, in a remote environment like the internet, you could possibly make any kind of subjective assessment of the capacity of an individual child to understand and give consent to their data being handed over. I'm not saying we know what the answer to this particular question is, by the way. It is a very difficult one, but what we are doing in the manifesto is underlining the fact that it exists and that it needs some urgent attention. There are a whole range of challenges arising around the increased use of the mobile internet. It's hard enough for parents, teachers, schools and so on to supervise and support children's use of the internet when they're doing it in the classroom or in a library or in their home. But as we know, once the internet starts going mobile, everything starts to get more complicated and more difficult. Online advertising to children, again, another issue that's coming up on the political agenda, coming up on the horizon. In the United Kingdom, again, we have some very, very strict laws about where companies can advertise and the kind of goods and services that they can advertise in media used by children. None of these laws apply in the online space, so we're simply drawing attention to it. And there was a survey done by a children's organisation in the United Kingdom, and they looked at websites that were only used by children, or rather were overwhelmingly used by children. By that I mean people under the age of 18. and they found that a third of the cases, a third of the websites that they surveyed that were only being used by children, you were finding adverts for things like tobacco, alcohol, breast implants, you know, all kinds of things that really shouldn't be being advertised in an environment where children are predominantly the main customers. Internet safety software. We think every new internet-enabled device, be it a mobile telephone, be it a computer, be it a PDA, ought to be sold with internet safety software pre-installed and pre-configured. We don't think it's reasonable for vendors of these products to sell these things into the domestic market and essentially just hope that the parent will find out that there are issues that they need to address. We think the software should be pre-installed and pre-configured. If the parent wants to then make it less safe, if the parent then wants to get rid of the safety software altogether, that's fine, they can do that. But it ought to be there in the first place. They ought not have to jump through so many hoops in order to make the device as safe as it can be from a technical point of view. Nobody, by the way, argues that internet safety software is the only solution or the best solution for keeping age-inappropriate content away from, or age-inappropriate websites away from children. Absolutely not. Education and awareness is the best possible route, but safety software can play a valuable supporting role, and we think that's why it should be pre-installed and pre-configured on every device. Again, this is an issue that we are raising in the manifesto because we don't think up to now that the industry has responded sufficiently positively. There's a whole range of people who are working with children, teachers, social workers, probation officers working with sex offenders and children as well, who need to be 2 minutes, I can do it, who need to have a much better understanding both of how sex offenders are using the internet to abuse children and how children themselves are using the internet more generally. In most of the professions in the United Kingdom, teaching is a great exception, by the way. What's been happening within the teaching profession, thanks to people like Janice Richardson, thanks to institutions like Vector, that's really coming on extremely well. There is a great deal of professional knowledge and development taking place in the teaching profession around the way children use the internet and so on. But if you look at the social work profession, if you look at probation officers, prison officers, people of that kind, there is still very, very little available. Treatment facilities for abused children, I mentioned already. There's a whole set of issues still that need to be resolved around social networking sites and the way in which their safety information is presented to children, which we think needs to be improved. I'm going to go back very quickly to the EU's mere conduit status. I've mentioned about the future of self-regulation earlier. I think there are questions about that. We do need to see the state, I think, helping NGOs to be better informed and have a better research capacity for dealing with some of these issues. And my final point concerns a European Union point, mere conduit status. As you know, under European law, and this therefore applies in every country, if an internet service provider is unaware of the fact that illegal content is on their service, they have no liability for it, unless and until its existence is brought to their attention, and then providing they act reasonably quickly to remove it from their site, they will have no legal responsibility for it. What the EU directive also does, however, is it introduces a disincentive for ISPs or other service providers to go looking for that content. Because what the EU directive says, if you go looking for that content and you miss it by accident, you could nonetheless be held to be liable because you're deemed to be the publisher of it. That seems to us to be completely wrong. Some companies, Google being the best known example, Google used the EU directive as the legal basis and legal justification for them refusing to patrol their site or police their site looking for bad content. They say, we will only act to remove this content from our site if somebody draws it to our attention, we then adjudicate upon it, and then we will remove it. We will not go looking for it ourselves, because if we do, we could be liable under the EU e-commerce directive. Absolutely wrong. It's not the view that many other companies take. MySpace, for example, and Bebo, a number of the other social networking sites constantly patrol their site, constantly look for illegal content or bad content, and if they find it, they remove it. They don't wait for somebody to come in. But I have to say Google have a point, because the EU directive does say that you potentially could attract legal liability. Our view is the EU should change that directive and maintain the position that you only have liability if you have actual knowledge, but you will not become liable if you look for something and simply miss it by accident. I think that would be a very sensible change in the law, and it would completely cut the ground from under Google's feet. And Google are not the only company, they just happen to be the most important one. Google are not the only company who rely on the EU directive as a defence for doing nothing. And it's simply unacceptable and wrong, but really to put Google and others under pressure, we need to get the law changed in the way that I've suggested. So there we are. We started with politics, we ended with politics. I hope I haven't bored you too much by talking too much about Great Britain, but I hope that some of the issues that I've raised you will recognise as being of much wider importance in your country too. Thank you for listening to me.
Dziękujemy bardzo.